Hey guys, tonight we're going to wake up in the year 800 AD, and trust me, your alarm clock is about to be a rooster with anger management issues and church bells that could wake the dead, which, given medieval hygiene standards, might actually be preferable to some of your neighbors. You're about to discover that your soft, moisturized hands have transformed into leather mittens. Your back already aches from a straw mattress that makes concrete look comfortable. And oh, yeah, you're a blacksmith now, which means you're basically the medieval equivalent of both IT support and a weapons dealer rolled into one sweaty, soot covered package. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Drop it in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first sensation that hits you isn't the cold morning air or even the scratchy wool blanket. It's the smell. Charcoal dust, iron oxide, and yesterday's sweat create a perfume that would make a modern gym locker room smell like a rose garden. Your eyes flutter open to a workshop that's part cave, part torture chamber, with tools hanging from every beam like medieval wind chimes. The forge itself sits cold and dark, a sleeping dragon waiting to be awakened, and you realize with a mix of pride and terror that you're the one who has to wake it. Your hands tell a story written in scars and calluses. Each mark is a lesson learned, that burn on your thumb from your first week as an apprentice, the missing chunk of fingernail from a hammer that found the wrong target, the permanent black under your nails that no amount of scrubbing will ever remove. These aren't the hands of someone who types on keyboards or swipes on phones. These are hands that bend iron to their will, that create the very tools civilization depends on. The rooster outside your window isn't just annoying, he's your official timekeeper in an age before clocks. Historians still argue whether medieval people actually followed strict time schedules or just worked from dawn to dusk. But that rooster doesn't care about academic debates. He knows it's time to get up, and he's going to make sure everyone within a quarter-mile radius knows it too. You swing your legs out of bed, feeling the rush of cold air hit your skin, and reach for your leather apron hanging on a peg. This isn't just protective gear, it's your uniform, your identity, as much a part of you as your own skin. Your workshop is attached to your home, a common arrangement that means you literally live where you work, the original work from home setup, minus the video calls and with significantly more fire hazards. The floor is packed earth, worn smooth by countless footsteps, with channels carved to direct water away from the forge. In one corner, your bellows wait like loyal dogs, ready to breathe life into cold charcoal, the mainstream historical fact nobody mentions. Most blacksmiths were partially deaf by age 40 from the constant hammering, which explains why your master always seemed to be shouting at you during your apprenticeship. As you stumble toward the forge, muscle memory takes over. First, check the charcoal supply. You'll need at least 2 baskets worth for a full day's work. Medieval charcoal wasn't just burned wood, it was carefully crafted by charcoal burners who lived in the forests, slowly cooking wood in earth covered mounds for days to create the perfect fuel. The quirky tidbit? Some smiths believed charcoal made from oak gave strength to swords, while willow charcoal was better for delicate work, a superstition that might have had a grain of truth, as different woods do burn at slightly different temperatures. The church bells begin their morning song, bronze voices calling across thatched roofs and muddy streets, and you realize these bells weren't just made by someone like you, they might have been made by you. Your position in society is a peculiar one, straddling social boundaries like a man with one foot on shore and one in a boat. You're not nobility, God knows, but you're not exactly a peasant either. You're what historians call those who work, but specifically, you're one of those whose work can't be done by just anyone who can swing a hoe or push a plow. Your workshop sits on the main street, prime real estate in medieval terms, because everyone needs to know where to find you. The baker might feed bodies, the priest might save souls, but you make civilization possible. Without you, there are no plows to till fields, no horseshoes to enable travel, no nails to build homes, no weapons to defend the village. This makes you simultaneously indispensable and suspicious. After all, a man who can make swords can choose who gets armed, and in a world where might frequently makes right, that's a dangerous amount of power for someone who isn't wearing a crown. The social hierarchy of 800 AD is less like a ladder and more like a pyramid made of stone, rigid, heavy, and likely to crush you if you try to climb it. At the top sits the king, probably someone you'll never see unless he's riding through on his way to bash heads with another king. Below him, the nobles, your local lord who owns the land your workshop sits on, the guy who technically owns you too, though not in the slave sense. You're what's called a free craftsman, which sounds better than it is. You can't just pack up and leave without permission, but you can own property, make contracts, and even testify in court, privileges that put you leagues above the average serf. The mainstream historical fact that surprises modern folks: most medieval craftsmen were literate, at least functionally. You might not be reading Aristotle in the original Greek, but you can keep accounts, read contracts, and maybe even scratch out a letter. This puts you in maybe the top 15% of the population, education wise. Your wife can probably read too. Someone needs to manage the books when you're busy hammering. Historians still argue whether medieval literacy was more widespread than we think, with some suggesting that practical literacy for trade purposes was common even if scholarly literacy wasn't. Below you on the social ladder are the agricultural workers, the serfs and peasants who make up 90% of the population. They look at you with a mixture of respect and resentment. You don't have to work the fields in blazing sun or freezing rain, but you also work with fire every day, which they consider only slightly better than working directly for the devil. Above you are the merchants, especially the traveling ones who bring exotic goods and, more importantly, news from the outside world. They need you to repair their wagon wheels and shoe their horses, but they also look down on you for working with your hands. It's a special kind of medieval snobbery. They'll gladly sell what you make for profit, but wouldn't want their daughters marrying your son. The quirky tidbit about your social position: You're one of the few people who can legally carry weapons in town, not because you're trusted, quite the opposite, but because you need to test what you make. This leads to the amusing situation where you, a craftsman, are better armed than many of the Lord's soldiers. Of course, using those weapons for anything other than testing would see you hanged faster than you can say, peasant uprising. But the irony isn't lost on anyone. Your workshop serves as a social hub too. While you work, people gather to share gossip, seek advice, or simply enjoy the warmth of your forge in winter. You hear everything: who's cheating whom, which merchant is watering his wine, whose daughter is secretly meeting with the miller's son. Medieval Facebook, essentially, except the drama unfolds in real time and everyone's watching. You've learned to work while half listening, offering non-committal grunts that could mean anything from how terrible to how wonderful, depending on what the gossiper wants to hear. The Lord's steward visits weekly, a self important man who walks like he's got a rod up his back and talks like he's personally responsible for the sun rising. He represents the delicate balance of your existence. You need the Lord's protection and patronage, but you also need to maintain enough independence to serve other customers. It's medieval office politics, except instead of passive aggressive emails, you're dealing with actual aggressive men wearing swords. The morning air bites at your face as you kneel before the cold forge, arranging kindling with the careful precision of a priest preparing an altar. Starting a forge fire isn't like lighting a campfire. It's more like coaxing a dragon out of hibernation. You need the perfect combination of dry straw, wood shavings, and smaller charcoal pieces, arranged just so, with enough airflow to catch but not so much that it blows out your precious spark. Your tinderbox contains char cloth made from linen, purposely burned in a sealed container until it's black and catches spark like it's desperate to burn again. One strike of flint on steel, maybe two if your hands are still clumsy with morning stiffness, and you've got that first magical ember. Now comes the dance. You feed the baby flame with infinite patience, adding progressively larger pieces of charcoal while working the bellows with a rhythm you could maintain in your sleep. Pump, pump, rest. Pump, pump, rest. Too fast, and you'll blow out your fire or burn through charcoal like a drunken noble through his inheritance. Too slow, and the fire dies, leaving you with nothing but smoke and shame. The mainstream historical fact here is that medieval bellows were sophisticated machines, not just leather bags. Yours features wooden boards with leather hinges and a clever valve system that maintains airflow even on the upstroke, engineering that wouldn't look out of place in a Renaissance workshop. The charcoal begins to catch properly now, glowing like tiny suns in the darkness of the forge. Each piece was once living wood, probably oak or beech, transformed through a process that takes days of careful burning in an oxygen-starved environment. Charcoal burners are odd folks who live in the forests, tending their smoldering mounds like mothers with sick children, sleeping beside them to ensure the burn stays perfect. They show up at your door monthly, faces permanently stained with soot, hauling baskets of the black gold that makes your work possible. The quirky tidbit? Some smiths swear they can tell which charcoal burner made their fuel just by how it burns, like wine snobs. But for carbon, your apprentice stumbles in, young Tom, a boy of 12 whose main qualifications for the job were having more fingers than missing teeth and parents willing to pay the apprenticeship fee. He takes over the bellows without being asked. He learned that lesson the hard way last week when you made him pump for 3 straight hours as punishment for sleeping late. The boy's arms are still skinny as willow branches, but they're starting to show the kind of wiry strength that comes from repetitive labor. He'll be sore tonight, probably crying into his straw pallet by the forge, but in 7 years, he'll be ready to create his masterpiece and join the guild as a journeyman. The fire's heart now glows with that perfect orange-white heat that means you're ready to work iron. You select your first piece from the pile, a bar of wrought iron about as thick as your thumb, destined to become horseshoe nails. Iron in 800 AD isn't the pure stuff modern folks picture. It's full of impurities, slag inclusions, and varying carbon content that makes every piece slightly different. You've learned to read iron like a fortune teller reads palms, knowing from the way it sparks under the hammer whether it's too brittle, too soft, or just right. Historians still argue whether medieval smiths truly understood the chemistry of what they were doing or just followed traditions that happened to work. Probably both. Like a chef who can't explain why their soup tastes perfect but knows exactly when to add the salt. You thrust the iron into the coals, watching as it slowly changes from black to red to orange. Temperature control is everything. Too cold, and the iron won't move properly under your hammer. Too hot, and it'll burn away like paper in flame. You don't have thermometers or fancy gauges. Instead, you judge heat by color. And here's where working in the dim light of your shop becomes an advantage. In bright sunlight, you might miss the subtle color changes that tell you when iron is ready to work. In your shadowy forge, lit mainly by the fire itself, every gradation from black heat to white heat stands out like a beacon. Your hammer arm already knows what to do. The first blow is always the most satisfying, called breaking the scale, as the fire scale cracks and falls away, revealing clean metal beneath. Then comes the rhythm, ding bang, ding bang, ding bang. The lighter hammer strikes on the anvil between heavy blows aren't just for show or to keep rhythm, though they do both. They let you reset your arm position, check your work, and give the metal a microsecond to settle. It's a song as old as metalworking itself, and every smith has their own variation. The morning sun creeps through your workshop's single window, illuminating dust motes that dance like tiny spirits in the smoky air. When your first customer shuffles through the door, it's Willem the farmer, a man whose face resembles a badly plowed field, all furrows and weathering, clutching the broken remains of his plowshare like it's his dying child. His eyes dart between you and the floor, the universal body language of someone who needs something desperately but isn't sure they can afford it. In medieval economics, a broken plow doesn't just mean inconvenience, it means potential starvation. You examine the break with professional interest, running your fingers along the cracked iron, feeling for weaknesses the eye might miss. The plow hit a buried stone. You can tell from the impact pattern, and Willem's probably been trying to work around it for days before finally admitting defeat. The mainstream historical fact people forget is that medieval plows were sophisticated machines, not just pointed sticks. This one features a coulter for cutting soil and a mold board for turning it. Innovations that revolutionized agriculture, but also created more points of failure. You quote a price, 2 chickens, and a day's help from his eldest son during harvest. Willem winces, but nods. He knows you could ask for more. Before you can start heating the forge for the repair, the door bangs open with the kind of authority that only comes from someone who's never had to knock in their life. Lord Aldrich's steward, Robert, strides in like he owns the place, which, technically, his master does. He's a peculiar creature, this steward, caught between worlds. Born a peasant, but elevated by literacy and cunning. He wields his master's authority like a club while desperately trying to distance himself from his humble origins. Today, he wants decorative work done on a helmet, roses and thorns to commemorate the Lord's recent marriage to his third wife. The last two died in childbirth, a common enough story that nobody even whispers about poison anymore. This takes precedence, Robert announces, not even glancing at Willem, who shrinks back like a salted slug. You're caught in the medieval equivalent of a customer service nightmare. Refuse the steward, and you risk losing the Lord's protection. Serve Willem first, and you're basically spitting in the face of feudal hierarchy. So you do what blacksmiths have done since the first noble decided his sword needed jewels. You lie creatively. Of course, Master Robert, you say, your voice smoother than the oil you use on your tools. Though I'll need to prepare special charcoal for such delicate work. Wouldn't want Lord Aldrich's helmet to bear anything but the finest decoration. I'll need perhaps 3 hours to ready the forge properly. It's complete nonsense. Charcoal is charcoal, but Robert doesn't know that. He preens at the special attention, agrees to return after midday prayers, and sweeps out with his imaginary importance intact. Willem's relief is palpable as you return to his plow. The repair isn't simple, nothing ever is, but it's straightforward. Heat the broken edges until they glow like sunrise. Hammer them together with flux made from sand and borax. Then fold and weld until the joint is stronger than the original metal. The quirky tidbit? Medieval smiths often added a drop of their own blood to important welds, believing it strengthened the bond. You don't subscribe to such superstitions, but you understand the psychology. When a farmer sees you literally putting your blood into fixing his tools, he's more likely to pay promptly and spread word of your dedication. As you work, Willem relaxes enough to share village gossip. The miller's been weighing his thumb again, putting his finger on the scales to cheat customers. The priest's new housekeeper is surprisingly young and pretty for someone supposedly hired for her cooking skills. The usual medieval soap opera stuff, but you listen because information is currency, and you never know when knowing who owes whom might save your skin. Historians still argue whether medieval communities were close-knit by choice or necessity, but working in your forge, you know it's both. Everyone knows everyone else's business, because their survival might depend on it. The plowshare glows cherry red as you begin the delicate process of forge welding. Your apprentice Tom watches intently, trying to memorize every hammer blow. This is how knowledge passes in your world, not through books or YouTube tutorials, but through years of watching, attempting, failing, and trying again. You sprinkle flux on the joint, watching it bubble and hiss, eating away oxides that would prevent a clean weld. The smell is acrid, burning your nostrils, but it means the process is working. 3 heats, maybe 4, and the metal flows together like water finding its level. Young Tom stands perfectly still as you inspect his latest attempt at drawing out a square nail rod. His work held up to the morning light, like a priest examining a relic for authenticity. The rod is lumpy, twisted in places where he got eager with the hammer, and you can see where he nearly burned through one section. In modern times, this would be trash. In 800 AD, this is a teaching opportunity and salvageable metal. You hand it back to him with a grunt that could mean anything, and he scurries back to the anvil, understanding that no immediate beating means he can try again. The apprenticeship system is medieval education at its finest and most brutal. Tom signed, well, his parents signed since he couldn't write, a contract binding him to you for 7 years. In exchange for his labor, you provide food, shelter, clothing, and the knowledge of the craft. The mainstream historical fact that surprises modern folks is that apprenticeship contracts were legally binding and incredibly detailed. Tom can't marry without your permission, can't frequent taverns, and definitely can't reveal trade secrets. Breaking the contract could land him in the stocks or worse. You, in turn, are legally obligated to teach him the mysteries of the craft, not magic, despite what the term implies, but the genuine secrets of working iron. Tom sleeps on a straw pallet beside the forge, partly for warmth, and partly because someone needs to tend the fire through the night for tomorrow's work. You remember your own apprentice days, waking every few hours to check the coals, add charcoal, and bank the fire just right. Too hot overnight and you waste fuel. Too cool and you spend the morning rebuilding heat instead of working. It's a delicate balance that takes months to master, and Tom's still burning either too much or too little. Last week he let the fire die completely, and you made him restart it using only flint and steel, no borrowing fire from the neighbors, as both punishment and lesson. The boy's daily routine would horrify modern child welfare advocates. He's up before dawn to prepare the forge, spends the morning pumping bellows until his arms scream, breaks for a meal of bread and ale. Yes, ale, water's too dangerous to drink straight. Then spends the afternoon learning basic techniques on scrap metal. Evenings involve cleaning tools, sorting iron, and if he's lucky, watching you work on complex pieces. The quirky tidbit: medieval apprentices were known for developing specific muscle patterns. Archaeologists can identify blacksmith apprentices' skeletons by their asymmetrically developed right arms and the particular wear patterns on their shoulder joints from bellows work. You're not just teaching Tom to hit hot metal with a hammer. There's metallurgy to understand, even if neither of you would call it that. He needs to recognize the 7 colors of heated iron, from black heat through blood red, bright cherry, orange, yellow, and finally white heat. Each temperature range serves different purposes: blood red for bending, bright cherry for drawing out, yellow for welding. Too hot and the iron burns, sending up sparkles like tiny fireworks that mean you're literally burning away your profit. Historians still argue whether medieval smiths understood oxidation or just knew that sparkly fire bad, clean fire good. The guild system controls everything about your profession, and Tom's eventual entry into it will mark his transition from boy to man. Guilds in 800 AD aren't the powerful organizations they'll become in later centuries, but they're developing their stranglehold on crafts. As a master smith, you're obligated to maintain standards, which means not flooding the market with subpar work or undercutting fellow smiths' prices. It's a medieval monopoly, complete with price fixing and quality control, dressed up in religious ceremony and brotherhood rhetoric. Tom doesn't just need to learn smithing, he needs to learn the politics of smithing. Today's lesson involves making charcoal tongs, a tool every smith needs, but most apprentices struggle with. The challenge isn't the basic shape, two long bars joined at one end, but making them spring properly. Too stiff, and they're hard to use. Too springy, and they won't grip properly. Tom heats his first bar, and you watch him struggle with the concept of tapering. He wants to hit the same spot repeatedly, but tapering requires moving the workpiece between strikes, creating a gradual transition from thick to thin. His tongue pokes out in concentration, a habit you've given up trying to break. At least he hasn't burned it on hot metal yet, though that's probably coming. Strike and move, you mutter, demonstrating on your own anvil. The rhythm is hypnotic. Ding bang slide, ding bang slide. Your hammer face hits exactly where you want, every time, muscle memory from 20 years of practice. Tom tries to imitate, overshooting and undershooting, creating a taper that looks like a snake that swallowed several mice. You resist the urge to take over. Learning means failing, and failing with expensive iron builds character faster than succeeding with scrap. The afternoon sun beats down on your workshop as you arrange 16 identical iron bars on your workbench, each destined to become a horseshoe. In the medieval world, horseshoes are like smartphone screens in ours, constantly breaking and needing replacement, keeping you in steady business. But unlike modern manufacturing, each shoe must be custom fitted to its intended hoof, making this less mass production and more bespoke tailoring for horses. You select the first bar, feeling its weight, checking for cracks or inclusions that might cause failure at the worst possible moment, like when Lord Aldrich's destrier is charging into battle. Creating a horseshoe starts with understanding the horse, which sounds philosophical but is brutally practical. A draft horse pulling carts needs thick, heavy shoes with deep heel calks for traction. A messenger's palfrey needs lighter shoes that won't slow its smooth traveling gait. War horses need reinforced toes because they're trained to strike with their hooves. Yes, medieval war horses were weapons, not just transportation. The mainstream historical fact that surprises people is that horseshoes weren't universally adopted until around 1000 AD. right now in 800 AD. You're on the cutting edge of technology, providing what many horses still don't have, but desperately need on these rough medieval roads. You heat the first bar to bright cherry red, then begin the bend. The curve must be perfect. Too sharp, and it'll pressure point the hoof. Too shallow, and it won't seat properly. Your anvil has a special horn just for this work, worn smooth by thousands of shoes. The first blow starts the curve, and you work systematically from center to ends, maintaining even thickness while creating the characteristic U shape. The quirky tidbit: some smiths in 800 AD still believe horseshoes bring luck, but only if they're hung points up to hold the luck. You've hung dozens around your shop, not because you're superstitious, but because customers expect it, and superstitious customers pay better. Next comes the nail holes, 6 to 8 per shoe, depending on size. This is where apprentices usually fail spectacularly. Punch too close to the edge and the shoe splits. Too far in, and the nail won't seat properly against the hoof wall. You heat a section white hot, position your square punch, and drive it through with one solid blow. The slug of iron pops out the bottom, leaving a clean hole that tapers perfectly for the special square nails you'll make later. Each hole weakens the shoe slightly, so placement is critical. Too many smiths rush this part and wonder why their shoes crack after a week of use. Tom watches from his bellows position as you work through the routine. Fuller the heels for caulks if needed. Adjust the clips that help hold the shoe in place. Ensure the ground surface is perfectly flat, while the hoof surface maintains a slight concave to prevent sole pressure. It's engineering that would make a modern farrier nod in approval, developed through centuries of trial and error. You let Tom try fullering, using the rounded hammer to create a groove along the shoe's ground surface. This groove serves two purposes. It makes the shoe lighter and provides better grip. His first attempts look like a drunk person tried to draw a straight line during an earthquake, but he's improving. Now for the nails, perhaps the most underappreciated technology of the medieval world. A horseshoe nail must be soft enough to clinch, bend over, when driven through the hoof, but hard enough to hold weight and stress. Too brittle and they snap. Too soft and they bend prematurely. You start with iron refined specifically for nails, lower in carbon than what you'd use for tools. The process is meditation in metal. Draw out a square taper, create the distinctive wedge shape. Form the head with 2 precise blows. A good smith can make 60 nails an hour. Tom can currently make 6, half of which are unusable. The real artistry comes in fitting the finished shoe. The local farrier, Marcus, arrives leading a stallion that prances and snorts like it's auditioning for a tapestry. Marcus is one of the few people you consider an equal, his knowledge of horses complementing your knowledge of iron. Together, you heat the shoe one final time and press it briefly against the prepared hoof. Smoke billows up, filling the shop with the acrid smell of burning keratin. This isn't cruelty. Hooves feel about as much pain as your fingernails do when trimmed. The hot fitting shows exactly where adjustments are needed and marks where Marcus will rasp the hoof for perfect contact. Historians still argue whether medieval horseshoeing was more art or science, But watching Marcus work, you know it's both. He nails with confident strokes, each nail entering the white line of the hoof wall at exactly the right angle, emerging 2 finger widths up the hoof. The protruding nail tips get twisted off and clinched down, securing the shoe better than any modern adhesive. You've made good shoes, but Marcus's skill and application makes them great. It's a partnership that exemplifies medieval craft specialization. You could probably shoe a horse in an emergency, and Marcus could probably make a crude shoe, but together you create something neither could achieve alone. The church bells announce sext, midday prayers, and your stomach responds with its own liturgy of growls and complaints. You bank the forge fire carefully, laying green wood across the coals to keep them alive but subdued, like putting a dragon down for a nap. Tom knows to watch it while you're gone, adding charcoal if it dims too much, but not letting it roar back to full life. Waste charcoal during lunch, and you'll be eating bread and water for dinner. Medieval economics are unforgiving that way. You hang your leather apron on its peg, splash your face with water from the quenching tub, trying not to think about all the scale and metal particles floating in it, and step out into the blazing noon sun. The marketplace sprawls before you like a living organism, pulsing with the heartbeat of commerce and gossip. In 800 AD, the market isn't just where you buy things, it's Facebook, CNN, and Amazon rolled into one muddy, chaotic square. The smell hits you first. Fresh bread battling with rotting vegetables, roasting meat competing with unwashed humans, and over it all, the distinctive medieval perfume of horse manure and wood smoke. Your eyes need a moment to adjust from the dim forge to the brilliant daylight, and when they do, you see the usual cast of characters that make up your small town's economic ecosystem. There's Marjorie, the alewife, whose brewing skills are legendary and whose tongue is sharper than any blade you've forged. She nods as you pass, respecting the unspoken agreement. You fix her brewing equipment. She keeps you supplied with ale that won't kill you. The mainstream historical fact people miss is that medieval ale was nutritious food as much as beverage, full of calories and vitamin B, and far safer than water. Marjorie's latest batch has hints of Groot, a mixture of herbs used before hops became standard, giving it a flavor that's part medicinal, part psychedelic, entirely medieval. You push through the crowd toward your usual bread seller, dodging a juggler who's either very talented or having some kind of seizure. It's hard to tell with medieval entertainment. A pickpocket makes a half-hearted attempt at your purse, but backs off when he recognizes you. Smart boy, stealing from the blacksmith means no one fixes your stolen goods, and everyone needs a blacksmith eventually. The bread seller, Henri, greets you with what might charitably be called a smile, but looks more like he's trying to pass a kidney stone. His bread is notorious for its density. You could probably use it to hammer out horseshoes in a pinch, but it's cheap and filling. Heard about the miller? Henri asks, knowing you're always good for gossip. You haven't. So he leans in conspiratorially, his breath a toxic mixture of garlic and tooth decay. Caught adding sawdust to his flour, Lord Aldrich's having him flogged tomorrow after morning mass. You nod sagely, filing this information away. The miller repairs mean he'll need new iron bands for the wheel soon, and a man recovering from flogging pays whatever you ask. Medieval justice creates business opportunities if you're cynical enough to see them. The fishmonger's stall provides today's protein, something that might have been trout when it was alive, but now looks like it's questioning its life choices. Fish in a medieval inland town is always a gamble, but it's a saint's day tomorrow, which means no meat, which means everyone's gambling. You haggle half heartedly, both you and the fishmonger, knowing you'll pay his asking price, because what's the alternative? Salted pork that's more salt than pork? The quirky tidbit about medieval diets is that they were often more varied than we assume when you could afford it. Peasants might subsist on bread and pottage, but a craftsman like you can afford onions, eggs, cheese, and the occasional splurge on spices that cost more per ounce than silver. A commotion near the stocks draws your attention. Some poor soul is locked in for public humiliation. Looks like Edgar the Tanner, probably caught dumping his waste in the wrong place again. Tanners are the untouchables of medieval society, their profession requiring them to work with urine and feces, making them smell like walking latrines. You feel a moment of sympathy until you remember he still owes you for knife repairs from last Christmas. The crowd pelts him with rotting vegetables, and you briefly consider joining in before remembering you're trying to set a Christian example. Plus, those vegetables cost money. Near the cross at the market's center, a traveling merchant has set up shop, his table glittering with goods from far off lands. There's real glass from Venice, spices from the mysterious East, and, your heart skips, a small ingot of what might be Woot's steel from Damascus. Historians still argue whether true Damascus steel made it to Western Europe this early, but you know quality metal when you see it. The price he quotes makes your eyes water. You could buy a horse for that much, a good horse. But the thought of working with steel that can hold an edge like the sunrise, holds color, makes your fingers itch. You tell him you'll think about it, both of you knowing you'll be back before he leaves town. The afternoon forge heat hits differently than morning, heavier, meaner, like the fire's been brooding about something during lunch and decided to take it personally. You're back at the anvil, but now the work turns serious. Weapons. The thing that makes blacksmiths simultaneously feared and essential in medieval society. Lord Aldrich's steward has returned, strutting like a peacock who's discovered cocaine, ready to discuss the decorative work on that helmet. But first, there's the matter of the dozen spearheads ordered for the Lord's men-at-arms, and this is where your job gets politically complicated. Making weapons in 800 AD isn't just about metallurgy. It's about navigating a maze of feudal obligations, church restrictions, and the constant question of who exactly you're arming, those spearheads. They could defend the village from raiders next month, or they could be turned against neighboring lords in the endless chess game of medieval politics. The mainstream historical fact people forget is that weapon making was heavily regulated even in the so-called Dark Ages. You need permission to make swords, records of who bought what, and God help you if weapons you made show up in the wrong hands. It's gun control, medieval style, except the guns are pointy and require more skill to use. You select your best iron for the spearheads. This isn't the place to cut corners. A spearhead that breaks in battle doesn't just mean an unhappy customer, it means a dead customer, and dead men's families have long memories. The design is deceptively simple: a leaf shaped blade with a strong central ridge, wings to prevent over-penetration, and a socket to fit standard ash shafts. But simple doesn't mean easy. Each spearhead needs to be perfectly balanced, strong enough to punch through mail, but flexible enough not to shatter on impact. You heat the first blank to yellow white, watching for that telltale shimmer that says the iron is ready to move. The trick with spearheads is the socket. Novice smiths always struggle here, trying to wrap hot iron around a mandrel without creating weak points. You learned from your master to forge weld the socket first, creating a solid tube, then draw out the blade. It's backwards from what instinct suggests. But it works. Your hammer sings against the anvil, not the rhythmic ding-bang of horseshoes, but a more complex pattern: draw, upset, flatten, fold. You're not just shaping metal, you're controlling carbon content, refining grain structure, creating a weapon that could mean the difference between Viking raiders pillaging your town or being driven back to their longships. Tom watches with unusual intensity. He knows that weapon making is advanced work, the kind apprentices don't usually see until their fifth year. But you're testing him, seeing if he has the temperament for this darker side of the craft. The quirky tidbit about medieval weaponsmithing: many smiths performed rituals during the process, not just superstition, but practical psychology. When a warrior sees you quenching his blade in honeymead while chanting Latin prayers, he fights with more confidence. Placebo effect with a sharp edge. You don't go that far, but you do ensure each spearhead gets quenched at exactly the right temperature, creating that distinctive crack hiss that means proper hardening. Robert the steward grows impatient, tapping his foot in a rhythm that makes you want to introduce his face to your hammer. But you can't rush weapon work. Rush a horseshoe, and worst case, a horse goes lame. Rush a spearhead, and someone's son doesn't come home from battle. You finish the blade portion and begin work on the wings, those lateral projections that keep the spear from penetrating too deeply. They need to be strong enough to stop forward motion, but not so prominent they catch on shields or armor. It's engineering that would make a modern physicist nod in approval, developed through centuries of fatal trial and error. Now then, Robert finally interjects as you set the first completed spearhead aside to cool. About his lordship's helmet. You examine the piece, good northern work, probably from a captured Viking craftsman or traded through the complex networks that crisscross even warring territories. The steel is decent, already decorated with basic engravings, but Lord Aldrich wants roses and thorns added to commemorate his marriage. You suppress the urge to suggest an adding coffins for wives 1 and 2. Medieval customer service requires more tongue biting than actual smithing. The decorative work requires different tools: lighter hammers, specialized chisels, and most importantly, a steady hand. You heat a small section of the helmet to dull red, hot enough to move metal, but not enough to affect the tempering. The rose pattern emerges slowly under your tools, each petal formed by careful displacement of metal rather than removal. This isn't engraving in the modern sense, it's more like metallic sculpture. Historians still argue whether medieval decorative ironwork was primarily functional or aesthetic, but working on this helmet, you know it's both. Those roses will catch sword blades, deflecting them from smooth surfaces. The thorns create visual confusion in battle, making it harder to target weak points. The church bells ring for vespers as you put finishing touches on Lord Aldrich's helmet, their bronze voices cutting through the hammer song like heaven interrupting earth's business. You set your tools aside, not from piety, exactly, but from a healthy respect for the social contract that keeps you from being branded a heretic. In 800 AD, the church isn't just a spiritual force, it's the FBI, social services, and Supreme Court rolled into one institution that smells of incense and disapproval. Besides, your work with metal has always felt oddly spiritual, and the bells remind you of the church fixtures you've been commissioned to create. Father Benedict needs new hinges for the church doors, candlesticks for the altar, and, most challengingly, a processional cross that will make neighboring parishes weep with envy. The mainstream historical fact that surprises modern folks is how much medieval Christianity influenced metallurgy. Churches needed vast quantities of metalwork, from tiny belt buckles for monks to massive bells that could be heard for miles. This created a steady income stream for smiths and pushed technological advancement. You're not just banging out horseshoes, you're creating objects that people believe can channel divine power. The cross commission is particularly delicate. It needs to be light enough for altar boys to carry during processions, but substantial enough to inspire awe. More importantly, it needs to incorporate a small relic, a splinter of wood that Father Benedict swears came from the true cross, but probably came from the local carpenter's scrap pile. You've learned not to question these things too loudly. Skepticism is healthy. Vocal skepticism in medieval times is a fast track to accusations of heresy, and nobody wants to find out if you can forge iron while on fire. You begin with the candlesticks, easier work that lets you think through the cross design. The iron heats to working temperature as you contemplate the weird and intersection of faith and metallurgy in your life. There's something almost alchemical about transforming raw earth, iron ore, into objects of beauty and function. The church calls it participating in God's creative work. You call it making a living, but sometimes, when the forge light dances just right and the hammer rings true, you wonder if they might have a point. The quirky tidbit? Many medieval smiths believed each piece of iron had a soul that needed to be awakened through fire and hammer. It's probably just carbon crystallization, but try explaining that to a world that thinks disease is caused by bad air. Tom helps with the simpler parts, drawing out the candlestick stems, while you work on the more complex bases. The boy's gotten quieter lately, more focused. Maybe it's the weapon work from earlier, or maybe he's just starting to understand that smithing isn't just a trade, it's a calling that demands everything and gives back in metal and fire. You catch him crossing himself before quenching a piece, a habit he's picked up from watching you. You're not sure if it helps the metal, but it definitely helps the customer's confidence when they see their smith taking divine precautions. The processional cross requires different techniques. You'll use pattern welding, what later centuries will incorrectly call Damascus steel, to create visual interest, alternating layers of high and low carbon iron, folded and twisted, creating patterns that emerge like scripture written in steel. It's time consuming, expensive work, but Father Benedict is paying in papal indulgences as well as silver. Your soul could probably use the help, considering how creative your tax payments have been lately. You heat two bars, one of good iron and one that's almost steel, preparing to weld them into something that transcends both. Why do we make church goods special? Tom asks during a break, bold enough finally to voice curiosity. You could give him the theological answer about glory of God and sanctity of worship. Instead, you tell him the practical truth, because priests have long memories and sharp tongues. Make a bad horseshoe, and one farmer complains. Make a bad cross, and every sermon for the next year mentions the smith, who clearly sides with Satan. Tom nods, understanding dawning. In medieval society, reputation is everything, and the church controls most of the narrative. Historians still argue whether medieval craftsmen were genuinely religious or just pragmatically observant. But you know it's not either or. When you're working on that cross, layering metal with the patience of a monk, illuminating manuscripts, something transcendent happens. The pattern emerges gradually, swirls and flows that look like clouds or angels, depending on the light. You etch a small chamber for the relic, sealed with lead and prayer, creating an object that's simultaneously functional art and mystical talisman. Whether you believe the splinter inside came from Christ's cross or Wilhelm's woodpile becomes irrelevant. What matters is that others will believe, and that belief will comfort them through plague, famine, and the general unpleasantness of medieval existence. The late afternoon sun slants through your workshop door when Harold Ironfoot arrives, and the temperature seems to drop 10 degrees. He's your main competitor, a smith from the other side of town who specializes in the kind of work you also do, which makes you natural enemies in the medieval business ecosystem. His nickname comes from an accident years ago when he dropped a hammer on his foot and kept working for 3 days before seeking help. Now he walks with a distinctive gait that announces his presence like a limping bell. You both nod, the minimal acknowledgement required by social custom, while internally calculating how to destroy each other economically. Heard you're making Lord Aldrich's new helmet decorations, Harold says, his voice casual as a snake in grass. Roses, is it? How delicate. The word drips with contempt. This is how smiths fight, not with hammers, but with implications. He's suggesting your work is feminine, weak, unsuited for a warrior's equipment. You resist the urge to point out that his last batch of horseshoes lasted exactly 2 weeks before cracking. Instead, you show him the spearheads cooling on your bench, their edges sharp enough to shave with, their balance perfect as a prayer. The relationship between competing medieval craftsmen is complex as any modern corporate rivalry. You need each other, When big orders come in, sometimes you have to collaborate, but you also constantly undercut each other, steal apprentices, and spread rumors about quality. The mainstream historical fact people miss is that medieval guilds eventually developed partly to manage these conflicts. Right now, in 800 AD, those structures are still forming, meaning disputes get settled through reputation, strategic pricing, and occasionally mysterious fires that definitely weren't arson because nobody can prove anything. Harold examines your work with the critical eye of someone who knows exactly what to look for. His thick fingers test the spearhead edges, check the socket welds, look for any flaw he can exploit in future conversations. Finding none, he shifts tactics. Young Marcus the farrier was asking about apprenticeships, his boys coming of age. Shame you've already got. He glances at Tom with theatrical disappointment. That one. It's a calculated insult, suggesting both that your apprentice is inadequate and that you're missing better opportunities. Tom flushes red, but keeps pumping the bellows, learning that sometimes the best response is steady work. You counterstrike smoothly. Marcus's boy, the one who fainted at the sight of blood during the pig slaughter. I'm sure he'll do well with your simpler work. Now it's Harold's turn to redden. His simpler work mostly involves nails and basic tools, profitable but unglamorous. The quirky tidbit about medieval business competition is that smiths often sabotaged each other through strategic charity. Donate a particularly fine piece to the church, and suddenly every other smith looks cheap. Fix the poor widow's cooking pot for free, and watch your rival match it or look heartless. It's weaponized kindness. I hear the Danes are raiding again up north. Harold changes the subject, probing for information. Lord Aldrich will need more than decorative roses if they come this way. This is the other currency between smiths, information about potential work. War means weapons. Weapons mean profit, but only if you position yourself correctly. Too eager, and you look like a vulture. Too disinterested, and the contracts go elsewhere. You share what you've heard from traveling merchants, carefully edited to seem helpful while revealing nothing actually useful. He reciprocates with equally worthless intelligence. It's like two poker players showing each other cards from different decks. The dance continues as you both pretend to be friendly colleagues while calculating each other's destruction. He mentions he's developed a new technique for tempering, probably a lie. You counter with hints about a source for better charcoal, definitely a lie. Tom watches this elaborate performance with fascination, learning that smithing is as much about politics as pounding iron. In a world without patent law or trade secrets, protection, information itself becomes a weapon to be hoarded, traded, or strategically leaked. Finally, Harold makes his real move. The monastery at Lindisfarne needs a new gate. Big job. They're taking proposals. Your heart races, but your hands stay steady. Monastery work pays well and regularly. Monks have that whole vow of poverty thing figured out in ways that involve lots of gold somehow. But Lindisfarne is 3 days' travel, meaning you'd need to close shop or trust Tom alone. Harold watches your face, reading calculations. He's probably already submitted a proposal, This visit just rubbing salt in wounds, but you've got ammunition too. Generous of you to mention it, you reply smoothly, especially since Brother Francis from Lindisfarne was here last month, placing advance orders. Not entirely true. He placed one small order, but Harold doesn't know that. His face goes through several interesting color changes before settling on a mottled purple that clashes with his beard. Well, he manages, may the best smith win. He limps out, his iron foot ringing against cobblestones like a cracked bell, already planning his next move. Historians still argue whether medieval craftsmen were collaborative or competitive, but watching Harold's retreat, you know it's both, neither, and something uniquely medieval, a knife fight with hammers and smiles. The workshop takes on a different quality as evening approaches, shadows lengthening like fingers reaching for secrets. Your next customer makes you wish you'd closed early. It's Agnes, the wise woman, though wise is what people call her to her face, while witch is what they whisper behind closed doors. She needs what she always needs: small iron implements that toe the line between medical instruments and things that might get you both burned at the stake if the wrong person starts asking questions. In 800 AD, the boundary between medicine and magic is blurrier than a drunk monk's vision, and you're about to spend the next hour dancing on that very line. Agnes carries herself like someone who knows things that could get her killed, but sleeps soundly anyway. Her order today includes thin iron probes for healing, curved needles for surgery, and small cauldrons that definitely aren't for brewing potions, because that would be heretical. The mainstream historical fact people forget is that medieval medicine was surprisingly advanced in some ways: cataract surgery, bone setting, even basic anesthesia using herbs. But it was also wrapped in enough superstition to make a modern doctor weep. Agnes practices both sides, healing with herbs and prayer while quietly performing procedures that actually work. You begin with the surgical implements, heating thin iron rods to white heat before drawing them out to needle thickness. This requires delicate work. One wrong hammer blow, and you've got scrap instead of scalpel. Tom watches nervously as Agnes examines each piece, her fingers surprisingly steady for someone her age. She rejects two probes for reasons you can't fathom, but pays extra for the ones she approves. The quirky tidbit about medieval medical instruments is that many were individualized to specific healers. Agnes's probes have tiny marks filed into the handles, not decoration, but a system for remembering which tool does what when you're elbow deep in someone's abdomen by candlelight. The baker's wife came to me last week. Agnes mentions casually while you work. Stomach troubles. Amazing what a person will swallow when they're desperate to end a pregnancy. The words hang in the air like smoke. This is dangerous territory. Abortion is both illegal and considered deeply sinful, but it happens anyway, usually with tragic results. Agnes's tone suggests she prevented a tragedy rather than caused one, but you focus intently on your work, hearing nothing, knowing nothing. Some knowledge is more dangerous than any weapon you could forge. The needles come next, each one requiring a specific curve that Agnes demonstrates with bent fingers. These aren't for normal sewing. The eye needs to be large enough for gut thread, the point sharp enough to pierce flesh cleanly. You've made these before, always with the same mixture of pride and unease. Your work might save lives, but it might also be used for procedures the church condemns. Historians still argue whether medieval healers like Agnes were proto scientists or dangerous quacks, but watching her inspect each needle with the focus of a master craftsman, you know she's neither and both. Iron holds virtue, Agnes says, apropos of nothing. Not magic, mind you, she adds quickly, glancing at Tom, but virtue. Wounds touched by clean iron heal better than those torn by wood or stone. You nod, having noticed the same thing. There's something about metal tools that seems to prevent the rot that kills more people than the original injuries. Maybe it's Agnes's virtue. Maybe it's what scholars in centuries to come will call antiseptic properties. All you know is that soldiers wounded by good steel often survive, while those hurt by rusty iron or dirty wood invariably die screaming. The small cauldrons are trickier. They need to be light enough for an old woman to carry, but sturdy enough to withstand repeated heating. More importantly, they need to not react with whatever Agnes puts in them. Some of her brews smell like death warmed over, and you've seen lesser iron eaten through by her concoctions. You use your best metal for these, folding and welding to create walls that can withstand both heat and corrosion. Each one gets marked with Agnes's personal sign, a circle with 3 lines that could be religious, could be pagan, could be nothing. Plausible deniability hammered into iron. Payment is, as always, interesting. Agnes pays partially in silver, but mostly in knowledge. Young Tom there, she says, eyeing your apprentice, has been favoring his left side. Old break in the ribs, never healed right. Willow bark tea twice daily, and have him sleep on his right side only for a month. As Tom starts to protest that his ribs are fine, then stops, remembering the fall he took 2 winters ago, Agnes smiles knowingly and continues. And you, Master Smith, that cough you've been hiding. Less time breathing forge smoke, more time in fresh air, and stop quenching in used water. The metal scale you're breathing will kill you slower than a blade, but just as surely. She leaves as twilight falls, her basket of definitely not magical implements clinking softly. You and Tom stand in silence for a moment, both processing the encounter. In a world where official medicine involves bloodletting and prayers, Agnes's practical knowledge is both invaluable and dangerous. You've just armed her for another month of walking the tightrope between healer and heretic, and you silently pray to whichever God handles such things that your iron serves healing rather than harm. The day's fading light forces you to confront the one aspect of smithing that most people never consider, the paperwork. Well, not paper exactly, because that's worth its weight in silver. Instead, you have wax tablets and a sharp stylus, tools for tracking who owes what in a world where most people can't read numbers, let alone words. You settle onto your stool near the window, squinting at marks that represent debts and credits, trying to remember if that scratch means Willem owes you 2 chickens or you owe him 2 horseshoes. Medieval accounting is less mathematics and more interpretive art. Your education sets you apart from most craftsmen. The ability to read and figure what passes for arithmetic in 800 AD came from your master, who learned from his master in an unbroken chain of literate smiths going back to God knows when. The mainstream historical fact that surprises people is that medieval craftsmen often had higher literacy rates than minor nobles. Lords could hire scribes, smiths had to track their own business or starve. You can read Latin well enough to understand contracts, write clearly enough to make your own, and calculate well enough to know when someone's trying to cheat you, which is constantly. Tom struggles with his letters on another tablet, practicing the alphabet with the dedication of someone who knows literacy is the difference between master and eternal journeyman. His A looks like a drunken triangle, and his S resembles a snake that's given up on life. But he's improving. You set him to copying the Lord Steward's latest order, good practice and practical backup. In a world without photocopiers, every important document needs duplicating by hand. The quirky tidbit? Medieval contracts often included elaborate curses for breach of terms. Your agreement with Lord Aldrich includes the phrase, "May his sword arm wither and his manhood shrivel if he fails to pay." Probably not legally binding, but psychologically effective. The accounts reveal what you already suspected. You're doing well, but not great. The spearhead order will cover next month's rent to the Lord. The horseshoes keep food on the table, but that Damascus steel ingot remains a dream. You trace columns of figures, each representing hours of sweat and fire. 3 shillings owed by Marcus the farrier for horse-tack repairs. 6 pence credit to Father Benedict for the candlesticks. A complicated barter arrangement with the cooper involving barrel hoops for wooden buckets. It's a web of obligations that would make a modern economist weep, but it works. Master, Tom interrupts, why do we mark some debts with crosses and others with circles? Good question. You explain the system. Crosses for Christians who'll pay eventually. Circles for those whose credit is more faith-based than fact-based. There's a third mark you don't mention. A small star for customers who might pay in information rather than coin. Medieval credit ratings. Basically, but administered by individual merchants rather than faceless agencies. Historians still argue whether medieval commerce was primarily cash or credit-based. Working through your accounts, you know it's overwhelmingly credit, with actual coins rarer than honest merchants. You draft a letter to the monastery at Lindisfarne, carefully worded to express interest in their gate project without seeming desperate. Writing materials are expensive, so every word counts. No scratching out mistakes that wastes precious ink. You compose in your head first, then commit to parchment in your best hand. The letter emphasizes your experience with large architectural ironwork, somewhat exaggerated, and your reasonable prices, completely fictional. You'll need to find a trustworthy traveler heading north to carry it. Letters in 800 AD travel at the speed of human feet, and half never arrive at all. The failing light forces you to light a tallow candle, its smoky flame adding another layer of grime to your already dubious air quality. By candlelight, the workshop takes on a different character. Tools become shadows, The cold forge looks like a cave mouth, and your account books seem even more cryptic. Tom has given up on writing and now practices numbers, which come easier to him. Good with his hands and good with figures, he'll make a fine smith someday, if he survives the apprenticeship and if the world doesn't end. Both significant ifs in 800 AD. You make a final entry in your personal journal, the one you keep hidden behind loose stones in the wall. This one's in a cipher of your own devising, recording things too dangerous for open books, which nobles are arming beyond their station, which merchants are asking about weapons they shouldn't need, which travelers carry themselves like warriors despite claiming to be pilgrims. Information is currency, but some information is too valuable to spend. These observations might save your life someday, or might get you hanged for knowing too much. You add today's entry. Harold knows about Lindisfarne, Agnes buying more than usual. Lord Aldrich ordered 12 spearheads, but has only 9 men-at-arms. The candle gutters as you close the books and secure them in their iron-bound chest. Numbers and letters swim in your tired vision, the day's physical labor combining with mental effort to create the special exhaustion that comes from using both body and brain. Tom has fallen asleep at his tablet, stylus still in hand, a line of slowly deteriorating bees showing where consciousness left him. You cover him with a blanket, no point waking him just to walk 10 feet to his pallet. Tomorrow will bring new orders, new challenges, new possibilities for profit or disaster. But for now, the accounts are balanced, the letters written, and the complex machinery of medieval commerce can rest until dawn. The evening air carries the scent of wood smoke and cooking as you finally close the workshop door behind you, leaving Tom to bank the forge and dream whatever dreams apprentice smiths have, probably involving less bellows work and more food. Your house, attached to the workshop but separated by thick stone walls, because only an idiot lives next to a fire hazard without barriers, glows with the warm light of the kitchen hearth. Inside, your wife Margaret orchestrates the controlled chaos of a medieval household with the efficiency of a military commander, if military commanders had to work with toddlers clinging to their skirts. Margaret doesn't look up as you enter, but her shoulders relax slightly. You're home. Therefore, the day's earnings are secure. Therefore, the family won't starve this week. Such are the calculations of a medieval housewife. She's stirring something in the large iron pot you made for your wedding gift. Practical romance at its finest. The mainstream historical fact people miss is that medieval marriages among craftsmen were often true partnerships. Margaret doesn't just cook and clean, she manages the household economy, negotiates with suppliers when you're busy, and keeps the books when your eyes are too tired from forge work to focus on figures. The miller's wife came by, she says without preamble, her tone suggesting this wasn't a social call. Wanted to know if we'd heard about her husband's troubles. Ah, the flogging. News travels fast in a medieval town, but Margaret's intelligence network puts professional spies to shame. She continues stirring, but you catch the slight smile. I told her we'd heard nothing, but if she needed flour on credit while her husband recovers, we could arrange something. 3 bags delivered this afternoon. You kiss her cheek, tasting flour dust and smoke. Your wife has just secured cheap flour for months by being strategically charitable. Machiavelli won't be born for centuries, but his spirit lives in medieval housewives. Your children materialize from various corners, like tiny Vikings scenting plunder. There's John, your eldest at 7, already showing the broad shoulders that mark a future Smith. Little Margaret, 5, who insists she'll be a Smith too despite societal expectations. Baby William, 2, whose main contribution to family life involves destroying things and emitting various fluids. They attack you with the enthusiasm of people who've been waiting all day for entertainment that doesn't involve chores. John wants to know if you made any swords today. Little Margaret wants to know why she can't work the bellows. William just wants to be held upside down. Medieval family life, exactly like modern family life, but with worse hygiene and better job security. Dinner is pottage, the medieval answer to what's for dinner when the answer needs to stretch. It's a stew of whatever's available, thickened with barley, flavored with herbs from Margaret's garden, and containing enough nutrients to keep a working family functional. Tonight's version has the fish you bought, some cabbage past its prime, but still edible, onions, and something Margaret calls herbs, but might be weeds. It's filling, hot, and doesn't taste like the despair it looks like. The children eat with wooden spoons you carved yourself, from bowls you traded for horseshoe nails, everything interconnected, nothing wasted. Agnes stopped by too, Margaret mentions casually, and you nearly choke on a fish bone. Your wife's tone suggests this wasn't about medical matters. She says young Mary Fletcher is with child. The Fletcher denies it's his. Medieval gossip. Better than any soap opera because the stakes include potential starvation or honor killings. You grunt non-committally. The Fletcher still owes you for arrowheads, and medieval debt collection doesn't include moral judgment clauses. Margaret continues her intelligence report, disguised as dinner conversation, updating you on births, deaths, marriages, and scandals, information you file away because you never know when knowing who's related to whom might matter. The quirky tidbit about medieval family dinners, they were often the only time the whole family gathered, making them crucial for education and socialization. John practices his numbers by counting beans in his bowl. Little Margaret recites her prayers, the only formal education she's likely to get unless Margaret teaches her letters secretly. Even baby William participates, banging his spoon in what might be rhythm or might be random violence. You share selected stories from your day, edited for young ears. The spearheads become tools for farmers. The helmet decoration becomes a gift for a lady, and Harold becomes another Smith rather than that limping bastard who's trying to steal our business. After dinner, the evening routine unfolds with practiced efficiency. Margaret checks your burns and cuts with the critical eye of someone who's seen too many small wounds become life-threatening infections. She applies honey to a burn on your forearm, Agnes's recommendation, while the children clear wooden bowls. No individual plates in this house. The family eats from shared bowls, building immunity and family bonds simultaneously. John helps his mother, while little Margaret insists on showing you her smithing, 2 sticks she's been banging together. You praise her technique while gently suggesting she might enjoy weaving. She gives you a look that says she'll be at your anvil the moment society allows it. Historians still argue whether medieval families were affectionate or purely practical, but watching Margaret tuck the children into their shared bed, you know it's both. Love in 800 AD isn't demonstrated through greeting cards and Instagram posts, but through ensuring your children know trades, arranging good marriages, and keeping them alive in a world that kills casually. You kiss each child, smelling wood smoke and innocence, before they disappear under rough wool blankets. Tomorrow they'll wake to the same rooster, the same chores, the same rhythms. But tonight, they're safe, fed, and loved. In medieval terms, you're winning at parenthood. The darkness outside is complete now, the kind of black that modern people never experience, where your hand disappears at arm's length and the stars look like God's scattered diamonds on velvet. You strap on your helmet. Yes, the blacksmith owns armor, because irony is alive and well in 800 AD, and prepare for your turn at watch. Every able bodied man takes shifts guarding the town walls, because professional soldiers are for rich lords, and your town makes do with craftsmen, farmers, and whoever else can hold a spear without stabbing themselves. The walk to the walls takes you through streets that transform after dark. What was bustling marketplace becomes shadow and suggestion. Every doorway could hide thieves. Every alley might shelter Vikings who've decided to try their luck inland. Your hand rests on the sword at your side, one of your own making, tested and trusted. The mainstream historical fact people forget is that medieval towns were incredibly dangerous after dark. No streetlights, no police force, just the hope that criminals are lazier than you are cautious. The curfew bell rang at sunset, but curfews are for people who follow rules, and medieval towns have their share of rule breakers. You climb the wooden ladder to the wall walk, relieving Otto the baker, who looks ready to fall asleep standing up. Anything? You ask, though you'd have heard the alarm bells if there was. Thought I saw torches to the north, he mumbles, but might have been my eyes playing tricks, or spirits, or Vikings, who knows anymore. He shuffles off to bed, leaving you alone with the night and your thoughts. The wall is an impressive, wooden palisade mostly, with stone sections where the town could afford it, but it's 12 feet high and topped with thorns, which discourages casual visitors. Your section covers the north gate and about 50 yards of wall on either side. You pace slowly, spear in hand, eyes adjusting to the darkness. The quirky tidbit about medieval watch duty? Most guards spent more time watching for fires inside the town than enemies outside. Fire is the real terror in a world built of wood and thatch. One dropped candle, one forge left unbanked, one idiot who thinks just a quick warm fire is a good idea, and the whole town could disappear in flames. You scan the roof lines, looking for the telltale glow that means someone's about to accidentally commit arson. From up here, you can see your workshop, dark now except for the faint glow from the banked forge. Your tools are in there, hammers worth more than some men's yearly income, tongs crafted specifically for your hands, and that anvil that took 3 months the savings to buy. Theft is a constant worry, not from random criminals. Everyone knows robbing the blacksmith means no repairs, ever, but from rivals like Harold or traveling smiths who might decide your tools would look better in their workshops. You've installed locks of your own making, complex mechanisms that would challenge modern locksmiths, but locks only stop honest people and lazy thieves. A sound from below makes you freeze, footsteps where no footsteps should be. You peer over the wall, trying to distinguish shadow from shadow. 3 figures move along the outside of the palisade, too purposeful to be drunks, too quiet to be honest travelers. Raiders, scouts, thieves checking defenses. Your mouth goes dry as you realize you need to raise the alarm, but carefully, too early, and they scatter, possibly to return later, too late, and they might already be inside. You pick up a stone, part of the ammunition pile kept for such occasions, and throw it at the alarm bell post. It clangs softly, enough to alert other guards, but not enough to wake the town. Marcus the farrier appears on the next section, bow in hand. Between you, you could probably handle 3 men, but probably isn't certainty, and certainty is what keeps you alive in medieval times. The figures below pause, perhaps sensing attention, then move on, disappearing into the darkness toward the forest. Scouts, most likely, checking defenses for a larger group, or maybe just travelers too cheap to pay the gate toll, looking for a way to sneak in come morning. You'll report it to the watch captain, who'll report it to the Lord's Reeve, who'll probably do nothing unless actual Vikings show up. Medieval bureaucracy, proving that humans have always loved forming committees to avoid making decisions. The rest of your watch passes quietly, giving you time to think about security in broader terms. Your workshop holds enough iron to equip a small warband. Your knowledge could forge weapons for any side in the constant conflicts that define medieval life. You're valuable enough to protect, but not important enough to guard specially. It's a precarious position, like standing on a sword edge. Historians still argue whether medieval craftsmen were politically neutral or secretly kingmakers. Standing on these walls, knowing that your weapons might determine who rules tomorrow, you understand it's both. You make the tools, others decide how to use them. Moral simplicity is for people who don't work with fire and iron. Dawn begins to lighten the eastern sky, and your replacement climbs the ladder, Geoffrey the Tanner, smelling like his profession even from 10 feet away. You brief him on the night's events, such as they were, and gratefully descend. Your feet ache from standing, your eyes burn from straining into darkness, but the town survived another night. That's all anyone can ask for in 800 AD. You head home, where Margaret will have porridge waiting, and the children will demand stories of your night adventures. You'll tell them about standing brave against the darkness, leaving out the fear, the boredom, and the very real possibility that tomorrow's watch might end differently. Heroes and stories don't yawn their way through guard duty. After all, the pre-dawn air bites with tomorrow's promise as you stumble back into your workshop, exhausted from the night watch but unable to sleep just yet. This is the liminal time, when night grudgingly surrenders to day, when the forge rests cold and the world holds its breath. You find Tom already awake, crouched by the forge, carefully arranging charcoal for the morning's first fire. Good lad. He's learning that blacksmithing isn't just about the dramatic moments of hammer and anvil. It's about preparation, maintenance, and the quiet dedication that nobody sees. You check tomorrow's work orders, scratched on wax tablets and hung on pegs like medieval post it notes. The monastery gate proposal needs sending if you can find a trustworthy traveler. Lord Aldrich wants those spearheads finished and delivered. The baker needs his oven door repaired before the morning bread burns. Agnes will probably appear wanting something that requires you not to ask questions. And somewhere in between, you'll need to keep your family fed, your apprentice trained, and your soul relatively unblackened by the compromises of medieval commerce. Just another day in 800 AD, the mainstream historical fact that strikes you, standing in your workshop as the first birds begin their morning arguments, is how precarious it all is. One bad harvest, one Viking raid, one accusation of heresy, and everything you've built could disappear like smoke. There's no insurance except community goodwill, no safety net except your own skills and savings. Yet people persist, building lives and businesses and families in the face of uncertainty that would paralyze modern folks. Maybe it's faith, maybe it's stubbornness, maybe it's just the human inability to imagine tomorrow being fundamentally different from today. You begin laying out tools for the morning's work, each placement deliberate as a prayer. Your hammer collection tells the story of your career, the first one you made as an apprentice, still serviceable despite your master's criticisms. The specialized ball peen for delicate work, the massive sledge for when subtlety fails. Your tongs hang in order of size and purpose, each pair worn to fit your grip perfectly. These aren't just tools, they're extensions of your will, made manifest in iron and wood. Historians still argue whether medieval craftsmen saw their tools as purely functional or somehow spiritual, running your fingers along your favorite hammer's handle, worn smooth by 20 years of use. You know it's both. The forge itself demands attention before the day truly begins. You clean out yesterday's ash and clinker, the fused waste that accumulates when coal burns with impurities. This black, glassy substance is worthless to you, but valuable to the fuller down the street, who uses it in cloth processing. Another link in the chain of medieval recycling, where nothing, absolutely nothing, goes to waste. Tom helps without being asked, shoveling ash into buckets that Margaret will later mix into her garden soil. Even forge waste serves a purpose in this economy of scarcity. Master, Tom says quietly, still working, do you ever wonder what it'll be like in 100 years? The smithing, I mean. It's an unusual question for a boy who typically focuses on the immediately practical. You consider your answer. In 100 years, the techniques you're teaching him will be largely unchanged. Oh, there might be better steel from the East, maybe improved bellows designs, possibly even those water-powered hammers you've heard rumors about. But the essence, fire, iron, hammer, and human skill will remain. The quirky tidbit about medieval technological progress is how slowly it moved. A smith from 700 AD could work in your forge with minimal adjustment. One from 900 AD will use almost identical tools. It's a continuity that's both comforting and slightly depressing. You share none of these philosophical musings with Tom, instead grunting, "It'll be like today, but with more work and probably less pay." He laughs, understanding the eternal complaints of craftsmen across all ages. Together, you prepare for the day's first firing, building the charcoal pile with the care of architects. Each piece placed to allow airflow while maintaining heat, creating the perfect environment for transforming stubborn iron into useful shapes. It's a ritual as old as metalworking itself, and one that connects you to every smith who ever lifted a hammer. The eastern sky brightens from black to deep purple to the pale gold that promises another day of work, worry, and small victories. Somewhere, that rooster is preparing his morning performance. Margaret will be waking the children soon, beginning the cycle anew. The miller is probably adding sawdust to his flour. The priest is preparing sermons about sins he commits regularly, and Harold is definitely plotting to steal your customers. But for this moment, in the quiet before the day's chaos, you're simply a craftsman preparing to practice your craft. Your hands are steady as you strike flint to steel, coaxing the first spark into flame. The forge accepts the fire like an old friend returning home, charcoal catching with eager crackles. Tom takes his position at the bellows without prompting, beginning the rhythm that will continue until darkness falls again. Pump, pump, rest. Pump, pump, rest. The heartbeat of medieval industry, powered by human muscle and sustained by human will. By full light, you'll be deep in the day's work, hammering out tools and weapons and the occasional piece of art. You'll navigate the politics of a small town, balance the books with more creativity than accuracy, and probably have at least one encounter that reminds you why medieval life expectancy is measured in decades, not centuries. But that's all to come. Right now, there's just the growing fire, the promise of honest work, and the knowledge that whatever else happens, the world needs blacksmiths yesterday, today, tomorrow, as long as humans need tools and weapons and the 100 metal things that make civilization possible. There will be someone working forge and anvil. The fire reaches working temperature as the church bells announce prime, the first prayers of the day. You select a bar of iron, feeling its weight and potential. Tom stands ready. Your hammer rises and falls, the first ring echoing across the waking town. Another day begins in 800 AD, no different from 1,000 days before, no different from 1,000 days to come. And somehow, in the rhythm of hammer on anvil, in the dance of fire and metal, that's exactly as it should be. As the morning settles into its familiar patterns, your mind begins to quiet. The worries about Vikings and taxes, about competitors and customers, fade into the background rhythm of your work. The hammer becomes lighter in your hands, each strike more prayer than effort. The iron moves like water beneath your touch, taking shape according to ancient patterns passed down through generations of smiths. This is the secret that no amount of explanation can convey, the deep satisfaction of creation, of taking raw materials and through skill and sweat transforming them into something useful, something beautiful, something that will outlast you. In a world where death lurks around every corner, where plague and war and simple accident can end everything in a heartbeat, this permanence matters. That horseshoe will carry riders long after your name is forgotten. That plowshare will turn the earth for generations. That sword might defend the innocent or oppress them, but it will endure. The morning grows warmer, and sweat begins to bead on your forehead. Tom maintains the bellows rhythm without complaint, learning endurance along with technique. Customers will arrive soon with their urgent needs and complicated payments. The day will fill with noise and negotiation, with minor triumphs and petty annoyances. But for now, there's just the ancient dance of smithing, unchanged since the first human discovered that fire could make metal bend to their will. Your hammer rises and falls, shaping tomorrow one strike at a time. The forge fire burns steady and true, and life in 800 AD continues as it always has. Difficult, dangerous, and somehow, despite everything, worth living. As darkness finally claims your workshop and you prepare for sleep, the exhaustion isn't just physical, it's the bone deep weariness that comes from fighting entropy all day, every day, from making order out of chaos, tools out of raw metal, civilization out of barbarism. Your shoulders ache, your hands throb, and your eyes struggle to focus. Tomorrow you'll wake to the same rooster, face the same challenges, swing the same hammer. It sounds like hell when described that way, yet you wouldn't trade it for anything. You blow out the last candle and make your way to bed, where Margaret already sleeps, the children's breathing soft and regular from their corner. Your rough hand finds hers under the woolen blankets, and she squeezes gently, still awake after all, waiting for you to safely end another day. No words are needed. You've both survived another day in 800 AD. Your family is fed and sheltered, and tomorrow holds the promise of continued work. In this time and place, that's wealth beyond measure. Sleep comes slowly, your mind still cycling through the day's work, but eventually, the rhythm of your family's breathing syncs with your own. The forge fire banks down to glowing coals that will slumber until dawn. Your tools rest silent on their pegs, and somewhere in the distance, a nightingale begins its serenade, its liquid notes spilling through the darkness like silver being poured. Your last conscious thought is neither profound nor poetic. It's the simple realization that tomorrow you need to order more charcoal. Then sleep takes you, deep and dreamless, the blessed unconsciousness of someone who has earned their rest through honest labor. 8 hours from now, that damned rooster will crow again. The cycle will resume, iron will heat, hammers will fall, and life will continue its eternal dance. For now, though, there is only darkness, warmth, and peace. The forge sleeps, the smith sleeps, and medieval life pauses, gathering strength for another day of creation and survival, of small victories and smaller defeats, of fire and iron and the indomitable human spirit that shapes both. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges, but tonight you rest.